you, Farokh, for the lovely introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashdeen Lilaowala. I am a textile designer from the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. I got interested in Parsi Gara textiles from a very early age. And I used to obviously see my mother and my aunts and other Parsi ladies dress up in Gara sarees. And that kind of fascinated, always fascinated. And I always, as a youngster, also asked questions about where did this come from and how did it all become part of our culture. So this talk is some of the study which I have done across many years. And it all started when I started working with the Parzor Foundation, UNESCO Parzor Foundation in New Delhi. And they kind of got me excited to learn the roots and the different roots, R-O-U-T-S and R-O-O-T-S, of Parsi Gara embroidery. And this is some of the research we have done across the years by traveling to different countries and across India. So let me start by introducing how this craft came into being. And then I will be talking about the different motifs and different designs used in Parsi embroidery. And then I will be showing you some slides of the interpretation and how we have used it in our work. So as you can see from this lovely photograph in front of you of a Parsi family, which most likely was shot in the early 20th century in a photography studio in Bombay. And as you can see on the right, the young bride or the daughter is wearing an elaborate Gara sari. What are these Garas and how did this small minuscule community come to take on a new sense of identity and new fashion? So as you can see in these different portraits, the Parsis were very often seen wearing these Garas, and the story starts as early as the 17th century when the community was settled in Surat, and they became very good shipbuilders and started flourishing in the textile industry. When the port of Sali in Surat got silted, Swali port in Surat got silted, they moved and migrated to Bombay. And in quoting the figures, in 1780, Bombay was inhabited by 33,444 people, of whom around 3,087 were Parsis. The population grew rapidly, and in 1872, the population of Parsis in Bombay was 44,091. And ironically, after many, many years and centuries, in 2020, it is pretty much similar. So how did this small community start trading with China and procure these wonderful textiles? As they were fabulous shipbuilders, they realized a potential to trade with China and export and import various goods from the country. So the main trade principally started in cotton, timber, and opium from India. And what was brought back was Chinese porcelains, silks, and most importantly, tea. The British were extremely, extremely fond of tea, and they kind of had this new reverence for tea, which was brought from China. I'll show you some more slides of Gara embroidery, and we go to the tea. Here you can see groups of young Parsi ladies posing in Gara saris. This is a painting. This is again a portrait of the ladies from the Tata family in the Gara saris. Again, few more paintings where you can see how distinct was the style of Parsi Garas. And here we come to how tea became one of the most important commodities in this trade. So basically the British used Indian merchants to trade with China and especially through Canton to get the commodity of tea, which was then sold. Basically Indians carried opium and exchanged tea So there was an economic exchange rather than the more expensive and difficult to obtain silver bullion. The East India Company imported Chinese tea to England, where it was consumed and sold to the wider world. So as you can see, there was a big fad in Europe to consume tea. The Parsi traders from India carried cotton and opium to China. Here you can see a lithograph of an opium factory. This is from Patna, but the main ports of trading were Bombay, Daman, Karachi, and Calcutta. This is another visual of an opium factory. Here also you can see. Once in a talk by Amitav Ghosh, he explained how these drawings were done by the British themselves and how they made it look very like a church. So there were these high walls, high ceilings, and there was a magnificent perspective given to the visual image. But actually, they were rather dingy, dull factories where opium was produced. This opium was carried to China in small ships across, and these clippers, which had 3 or more masts, were perfect for the cargo because they moved fast and they kept the cargo safe. When they reached in China, there were various other countries who were trading with the Chinese, and the Chinese had a rule that nobody could enter mainland China. So all the trade happened on the Pearl River, and there were factories or warehouses built on the shores of the Pearl River. And here you can see some of these small houses. So on the ground floor was a warehouse, and on the top floor was where the merchants stayed. And there were, by the early mid 19th century, there were close to 11 companies trading out of Canton. And the traders had to lock up these factories by 10 o'clock because they were too scared of thefts and robberies. And it was very, very difficult for them to live on the outskirts of the river. As you can see here, there's another view how busy the whole harbor was and how much trade used to happen from here. As many of you would know, China was famous for producing silk, and they had a large silk industry which was prosperous and completely advanced, far more advanced than anywhere in the world. Here you can see Chinese women setting up the warp, which would be then put onto the loom. Here you can see where a Chinese person is weaving the textiles, and they were weaving quite advanced weaves even in the early 18th and 19th century. Many of these silks were then decorated, embroidered, hand embroidered, and sent across to Europe. They were used as shawls, they were used as fire screens, they were used as tablecloths, and also in a lot of European fashion. So we see a lot of influence of the Orient and the chinoiserie influence. As you can see here, the whole process of how silk was beaten, then it was spun individually, and then made into fabric. So some of the important Parsis who were trading with China at that point were the Wadia family. Here you can see a portrait of Naurozji Jamshedji Wadia, who was one of the finest shipbuilders and traded with China extensively. The most important or prolific person who did really well with his trade with China was the Sir Jamshedji Jijiboy, and he himself made 5 different voyages, and he owned something like 8 ships which traded with China. His last voyage was in 1807, and from then on, Jamshedji traded from Bombay itself, and he traded to the islands of Siam, Singapore, Indonesia. The Tata family were also a part of the trade, but they came in much later. And this is a rare picture of J.N. Tata with his wife Hirabai and the two sons Dorab Tata and Ratan Tata, and the two wives Mirbai and Nawazbai Tata. So the Tata family also traded, but they just came in really at the end of it. And as you can see, when the Parsis, so the anecdote is when the traders were traveling to China and they saw these beautiful textiles being done for the European market. I was told this story by a old Parsi auntie when I was doing my research in Navsari, and she said her family used to trade, and they saw these very elaborate textiles being embroidered. And one of the gentlemen of the family said, "Why don't you make it as a sari?" So 5 and 5 yard textile which was fully embroidered, and that's how I think the Gara came. We still don't know what is the exact word and how Gara came into being. Some of the thoughts are that the Gara is done on such a light fabric that it is you can sieve through it or garo through it. So that's how the name came. But we are not 100% sure how this real name came about. So we are going to look at the different designs which were involved in this trade. And when these saris came into the Parsi families, the women wore them, and there was a new found richness, and they were affluent and they could afford these luxuries. So some of the, if you look at some of the most important motifs, one of the first motifs is the Chakli motif, or the contradicting sparrows. And if you see on the right, you can see this old Chinese textile, which has birds perched on them. And both the birds are looking in either different directions or looking away from each other. And there is a beautiful symmetry and flow in this embroidery. So you don't see a break, you don't see. And if you see on the left is a traditional Persian textiles, which has a pattern of the bird and the flower, and it's called the Gule Bulbul. So you can see how even as early, like motifs were exchanged across oceans, across land, and there was a common language. Here you can see one of a magnificent example of the Chakli, and the birds again very beautifully done, very realistic, and looking in different directions. Again, there is a beautiful flow where your eye doesn't stop or catch any element. On your left is a simpler version of the Chakli. And as the trade increased, a lot of people in India also started imitating the Chinese textiles and started, some embroidery was done in Parsi families in Surat and Bombay. Here you can see a rare piece in which there is a Chakli and another Chakli. So they're like three birds together on a stem. And I have seen a lot of Chakli saris, but I haven't seen one which has three Chaklis and Chaklis. So here you can see another example, beautiful example. So the more, as the trade increased and as garas became very fashionable, the colors started emerging. There were colors with like reds, purples, blacks, which became extremely popular. And Parsi embroidery started becoming a little more simplified. So the embroidery was done in a single shade of cream or white. And it actually, we've thought why it was that. And also some of the reasons being that the Parsi women always wore their sadra under the blouse, and the sadra showed. So the sadra being white did not clash with the embroidery. Also, there was a fondness for pearl jewelry, which also matched to the off-white embroidery. So here again, you can see magnificent examples of the Chakli design. Another common design is the peacock. And if you see between the Chakli, there is a Chinese peacock. And in the neck on top also there are peacocks. Here, another slide where you see a magnificent, on the left, you see a magnificent peacock in full regalia, and it's a traditional Chinese textile. And on the right, you can see how it has been interpreted in a sari in Parsi embroidery. So the colors got slightly simplified. They used bold, bright colors, but all were beautifully balanced with a lot of cream color. This is another border which has the more. And if you see the difference between the peacocks represented in Chinese textile, where their whole tail was always upwards and they were shown as dancing, the Indian peacocks have been shown more often with the tail flat and as if they were striding or walking. This is another beautiful example of a jabla, which has a more border at the bottom and a trellis design on the top. Another favorite motif was the crane, and it is one of the reasons why I got into Parsi embroidery. I simply love the crane motif, and the story is that the Chinese were obsessed with flight and no human ever flew. So they thought that it was magnificent for these big birds to be flying, and very gracefully and very elegantly. And the crane is a symbol of long life, and it is also the symbol which was put on the badges of Chinese generals. So the emperor had a dragon, and the emperor's dragon had 5 claws. The princes had 3 claws. The queen had the phoenix, and the general or the commander of the army had a crane symbol on their badges. So cranes also have other birds which take your soul to heaven. So they're very, very revered in Chinese mythology, and you see them a lot on Parsi Gara textiles. So this is another beautiful textile with cranes in movement. And the beautiful part of a crane is that you can show it in lots of movements. So it could be kind of in flight, it could be landing, it could be sitting, it could be perched. So there are lots and lots of variations of the bird which you can achieve. And like on this slide, you can see the bird. It's kind of twisted. It's much more simplified. So we think that this was done much later, or maybe done by a Parsi lady or a family in India. Another motif which is very popular is the fish. In the Chinese, the word for fish is yu, and is the same for abundance. Now, this is a spectacular gara which has lots and lots of different fish and everything which you can find under the ocean and in the sea. So you have eels, you have turtles, you have crabs, you have various sharks in this beautiful, beautiful gara. And it's I have seen 2 or 3 of these. So definitely we know that even though some people believe that they have the rarest piece, and this would happen very often when I traveled across India and I would meet somebody in Baroda or in Ahmedabad, and they would say, "Untune garo dekharas." I'll just say it in Gujarat. Garo dekharas je koi nahi paase nathi. And it basically meaning that I'd show you a piece which nobody has, and then I would travel to Hyderabad or somewhere and see the same piece. So it was very difficult sometimes to tell them, "No, auntie, I have seen this piece with some other family and not." But that showed us, and the observation we had was that these saris were manufactured in a warehouse where they would do a khaka and then repeat the design and make either 2 or 3 and sometimes lot more copies of the same design. So and obviously there's some, because embroidery is done by hand, there will always be variation. So here you can see what we've tried to do is we've stitched the whole sari, and unfortunately we couldn't increase the thing, it wasn't fitting, but you can see this sari has crazy amount of animals and aquatic life, Unfortunately, obviously, the person doing it did not realize how it would be draped. And that's why when you drape it, all the animals are ulta, pulta, and you find strange motifs placed all over the sari. So as much as it looks gorgeous, hung or as a wall piece, it doesn't look really great while it is worn. Here you can see another variation of the same gara, which is in red. So as you can see, the fish is very prosperous, auspicious in Parsis also. And we use it as a chalk dabba. We use it in many ceremonies across the different rites of passage. So you can see how the motif has been translated in different borders and textiles. The, the next motif is the butterfly motif, and the butterfly is called te, and it signifies 70 or 80 years. So basically, it is a motif which blesses the wearer good age, long age. And also, butterfly is like the Chinese Cupid, and it is very often considered fun to have a couple wearing butterflies, two butterflies. So here you can see a beautiful purple Gara sari, which has not a perfect butterfly, but the motif has been styled like an elegant butterfly with a peacock and flowers. Again, here is a jabla with the same design. So like I said earlier, designs were repeated, designs were created in a kind of lineup where you could use them again and again. This is another very simpler design of a butterfly in a square trellis. And here you can see these.
No, I don't want to be together.
You can see these borders where you see the butterfly on the above border. It is rather elaborate, the butterfly, and it is done with very fine khaka stitch or the peaking knot, and below is a satin embroidery, and it's beautiful how they have highlighted only the butterflies and not the flowers, etc., in the border. The next motif is the chrysanthemum. The chrysanthemum is a very auspicious motif in the Chinese, and they celebrate chrysanthemum is the flower of autumn. And on the 9th day of the 9th month, in China, they hold a ceremony where they kind of drink chrysanthemum tea. They prepare chrysanthemum tea and drink it. So here you can see on the right is a traditional textile with chrysanthemums. On the left is another traditional shawl from which we've taken the detail. Now chrysanthemums, there are various varieties of chrysanthemums, and you can see in the embroidery how baby chrysanthemums were drawn and how full chrysanthemums in bloom and how they have been simplified. So like in this gara, it is much more simpler, but another beautiful motif, very typical to Parsi Gara embroidery. Here you can see chrysanthemums which are with a bamboo garden, in a bamboo garden. So the bamboo and the chrysanthemum is mixed. This is another shawl with much bigger, robust chrysanthemums. The next motif we are looking at is the phoenix. The phoenix embodies 5 different elements of the human form. So its head represents virtue, its wings duty, its back denotes correct behavior, its breast symbolizes humanity, and its stomach reliability. So the phoenix was a very revered motif and often associated with the empress. And here you can see a rare jabla in which you have 2 phoenix coming down, and in between is like a seal or a Chinese coin. And very often on brides in Chinese textiles used to have the seal on their textiles, because the seal, the phoenix motif, because it kind of alluded to the fact that for that one day, the bride was like the empress. Here you can see another beautifully rendered phoenix. Also, we've compared here how the traditional phoenix was very multicolored, very, very elaborate, with different colors in the neck, the different colors on the chest. The plume is beautifully rendered, and in an elaborate gara on the right, it is much more simplified and worked on. Here you can see the sketches of how the khakas were made and then how it was translated in embroidery. This is another rare jabla where you see a pair of phoenix perched. So many people have asked me, how come you don't see dragons in Parsi embroidery? And we have tried very hard to find dragons. And this is a border I recently found, and I think last year. And this was the first time I have actually seen a dragon drawn, embroidered on the border. So this may be much later, and it's kind of very, very stylized, but it's a beautifully unique border in which you have an dragon which has been embroidered throughout the border. And we have seen in textiles where the only reference to dragons was that children playing with a puppet, a dragon puppet, and in the Chini sarees, but we've not seen any textile which was designed around a dragon. So this is quite rare to see a dragon in a core, Parsi core. The other very rare motif is a bat. The bat, the Chinese word is fu, and fu also means happiness. So as much as the bat is looked down upon, it is a very important symbol. And another funny anecdote was that when I was studying the saris and traveling across, and many of the Parsi ladies did not realize they had bats on their saris or in their borders, and they all thought it was butterflies, or they had just not noticed. And when we kind of told them this is a bat, and you should have seen, they did not want to wear the sari ever again. And I have been lucky where one lady actually said, "Tu I code lene ja," like you keep the code because I'm never going to wear it again. So sometimes you could get very beautiful textiles out of just telling people or making them realize what the motif is. So here again, there's a border on top which has a very elaborate butterfly, and on the left hand corner, you can see on top is a bat, and which we've shown in detail below. So the bats were very detailed and extensively drawn. So most people kind of mistake them for butterflies. So the two bats represent long life. Four bat means four joys, and five bats stands for blessings. So Chinese textiles have a lot of bats. Here again, you can see a border with the bat motif. So this was the border I got from somebody. Then another motif which we've used extensively is the, here you can see the monk riding on a bat. So it's a very detailed border with khaka knots and stitches. And you can see the monk is riding on a bat on the right hand side, and there is a deer with the monk. I'll tell you about this a little later. So again, here you see traditional pieces which have the bat on it. So another motif which kind of we discovered in our research and is the sacred fungus or the divine fungus. And Dr. Shanaz Kama, who heads Parsi Foundation, she kept noticing this motif and she kept saying there has to be some meaning to it. And we realized that a lot of Parsi jablas, for children's jablas, had this small meaning, divine fungus. So divine fungus basically is an amoebic shape, which you can see the man is seated on and the birds are perched on. And it basically is free flowing, and it is for good luck and myth and longevity and immortality. So the divine fungus is actually very auspicious, and it's also very difficult to tell people that your sari has fungus on it. So, and it's actually very good for the sari. So here you can see again examples of birds being perched on the divine fungus. The peacock in the middle also is perched on divine fungus. Now, we have had a lot of debate with people, some people saying these are rocks, and a lot of Chinese scholars associate these as rocks of immortality, and also that some people say that there's very little difference between rocks and the divine fungus. But we've read more and more that there's definitely the motif of divine fungus, and very often the peacock is perched on the divine fungus, and the deer is the only animal who can actually find the divine fungus. So on the left, you can see this textile where you can see the peacock perched on it, and below is a deer uh, around the divine fungus. So this is a border again where you see the peacock perched on the divine fungus and the deer next to it. And as you can see in these two representations of deer in the textiles, you can see the deer is holding the divine fungus in its mouth and carrying it. So it's a very quaint observation, and this has come after many years of research and reading about different motifs, how they were associated and how they came about. Another motifs we have seen largely in borders are the Taoist symbols. There are the 8 Taoist symbols, which are the fan, the sword, the bottle god, the castanets, the flower basket, the bamboo cane, the flute, and the lotus. So as you can see, the illustrations in the slide, and on the right hand side, you can see how they have been embroidered using gold thread and with a couching technique. So you see the castanets and you see the lotus, you see the fan, and you see the different flute, the bamboo and the flute. This is another border in which you can see the different Taoist symbols, the gods, and the castanets. Another motif we have seen is the endless knot, and it gets repeated in various textiles. And we have seen architecture in Iran, which also has the same kind of endless knot motif. So there is a lot of connection between Persia, China, and then how it kind of eventually reaches India and into Parsi textiles. So Parsi textiles have always been referred to as an amalgamation of 4 beautiful different crafts. So that influences are Chinese, Persian, Indian, and British. So I will show you some slides later of how the European sensibility also influenced the craft. And here I'm going to run you through some of the famous motifs. And this is the China Chini motif, or the China man and Chinese motif. And a funny story that very often when we've done this design in our sarees and all also. So very often in Delhi, when we have customers, they call it the Gudiya ki sari, like, the doll sari with small doll-like figures. And recently I had a lady who called me, and she said, I'd love to have your sari. And she really liked the China Chini sari. But she said, today, now the climate is not nice politically, and I wouldn't want to wear Chinese motifs on my sari. So can you change my order? So it's funny how something which is so traditional and something which is so old can today also be interpreted in different ways. So the China Chini sari was very popular. The design was very popular, and it basically was a landscape of human figures, pagodas, bridges, birds, flora, fauna, all mixed together. It was very exotic, and it was extremely rare because it kind of gave you an insight into life in China and how they lived. And so it was lovely for people in India to wear and kind of be proud of their saris. This sari belonged to the late Bhikhu Manekshaw of Delhi, and she had a story where her uncle had made it for his bride, and when in China, specifically commissioned this sari. And when he came back, he was kind of told that he wouldn't get to marry that same woman, but to marry another, the lady's sister. And he was so upset that he gave this sari to his own sister, and that's how Bhikhu Aunty inherited it from her mother. So every piece textile has a kind of anecdote, has a kind of story, and it was lovely to go and hear people exchange ideas and tell how this was by I got through my maternal side. This was when I got married in the family, and the dating usually we get to know was when this was worn at my engagement or this was worn at her wedding. So you kind of have a rough idea that it was definitely 50 years old, 80 years old, 100 years old, or more. This is another fantastic example of China Chini. And if you see, the design is so, as Parsis use the word gicho gich, and it is like all over, and it's really tight and detailed. And if you see on the right hand picture, on the lower picture, the face detail. So this is again an extremely rare piece where I've seen only one piece in which the faces are with ivory. So instead of, they embroider first the shawl and then they carve out small pieces of ivory and attach that into the embroidery. So the shawl is beautifully embroidered, and then the faces and the hat are small pieces of ivory attached to the shawl. So very rare, again, detailed, but we've seen one or two pieces online, but I've seen only one piece in real, and it's extremely beautiful and also very heavy. As you can see in this slide, there are lots of animals there, like elephants, pagodas, there's dogs, horses. There is and if you see the middle border, it has a dragon, again represented in it. So again, something which is quite rare. So here is a beautiful textile with China Chinis doing different activities. And when I went to study textiles in uh, Hong Kong, I met these ladies whose mothers basically, and they lived in the island of Shamin, and it's a very small island, and their mothers were very much involved with the craftspeople, and they used to commission textiles to these craftspeople, and they used to tell them what motifs to do and how to use and how to wear. So this was one of the rare textiles which they had commissioned, and as you can see, it has very unique placement of motifs, and it's a very big repeat, so you think that all figures are different, but they get repeated after some point. And one of the ladies made it in red, and her friend made the same textile in black. And we know that Parsi ladies started traveling to China only in the 1850s, and the first 1835 was when Putli Bai Dawar accompanied her husband to China, and she was the first Parsi lady to travel across to China. And I think once the karigars or craftspeople in China saw how the sari was draped and things like that, they may be able to visualize better. And that's where you see how the motifs kind of changed and how they were placed so that when you drape a sari, they were beautifully falling. This you can see is another China Chini, which is a little more modern, much more multicolored, most likely made in India. This is an elaborate jabla, and here in this jabla, you can see two children kind of playing with a dragon figure, women seated at a table. You have people under a canopy, a peacock resting. There's a deer also. So you have different, and a man carrying a flag and lanterns. So you have different daily life depicted in these beautiful China Chini saris. Here you can see the detail of the bridge. And the idea of showing bridges and pagodas was that it was an architectural marvel, and it was difficult to make bridges and pagodas, tall pagodas at that point. So they wanted to showcase how they had created these beautiful things in their personal life. And here below you can see a popular design with human figures, which was called the Bakra Bakrini Kor. And it always had a man guiding a goat, man and a woman guiding a goat. This is another shawl from the Parzor collection, which has the China Chini figures riding on a donkey, and the man with the lanterns and the flag in the background. Here you can see another representation, and it's quite beautifully done, where the man riding the donkey is on top of the clouds, and there's a pagoda at the back. There's some fence, bridges, etc. in the background. This is the woman, I think, going over the bridge. And you can see in the bottom, they have kind of a locomotive, like a car with wheels on it, or it's a carriage which is being pulled. Yeah, again, very beautiful, fine examples of China Chini in very, very fine peaking knot, or the Khaka stitch. Now, there are lots of legends about this stitch. It's basically like a French knot, but it is much more finer, and it has a small tail at the end of it. And the story goes that people got blind doing it, and because it was so intensive and it was so detailed. But we can see many, many textiles where, and Khaka basically in Gujarati means seed pearl, and it kind of looks like small pearls which have been used to decorate the sari. Another quaint and popular design was the Kanda Papeta, or the onions and potatoes. And Parsis love naming the designs to something which was familiar. And polka dots seem to be very, very common and so regular. So it was like regular, like food, Kanda Papeta, and the love they have for food kind of translated into textiles also. Here you can see another beautiful peacock border with the Kanda Papeta motif on top. And very often these Kanda Papetas are rows of polka dots done in two shades of cream. So you can differentiate, one is the lighter one is Kanda, and the darker one is the Papeta. But basically it's a simple motif of the polka dots. As you can see here in a jabla which has been converted into a blouse with the Kanda Papeta motif. Another motif is the Karolia, or the spider, and spider motif. So Parsis call it the Karolia, and very often you see in textiles it has like 8 to 9, sometimes you even see 10 to 12 different feet, and it's one of the most difficult motifs. It looks very simple, but it's extremely difficult to embroider, because you need to maintain movement, and you need to be very accurate in while drawing the Karolia. So it gives the textile a lot of dynamism, and it looks like things are moving. There's a slight bit of optical illusion if it's done very, very well. And we've seen simpler versions of it with also 4 legs and things. We found a piece once, and it had a writing at the side, which I'll show you later. And I kind of asked a friend to translate it, and it's the Chinese called it the spin wheel design. So it looks like a spin wheel, so it was called the spin wheel, but the Parsis popularly knew it as the Karolia motif. So here you can see the Karolia jabla, where it's only got 6 legs, and it's got a lot more clarity and movement. Another motif we see occurring all through the textiles is the Paisley. And these are the core Pallav sarees, which are very popular. And it basically has a border, which with often with birds and the endless knot. And between the two borders, you see the two different paisleys. So if you see the bottom paisley, it is much more thicker, it is much more squarer, and that is the Chinese paisley, which is more inspired by an urn or pottery or Chinese ceramic. And at the bottom of the paisley are like 5 petals, and it's always described as the seat of the Buddha. So these 5 small petals you can see is the feet of the Buddha, and the paisley is elaborately embroidered with flowers, birds, etc. And on the top is the Indian paisley, or more, which is something Indian, and it's more like an ambi or a mango. So it has a lot more curve and a lot more roundness. And as you see, like a paisley again is a motif which has traveled across regions. And if you see the Persian or the Kashmiri paisley, it's much longer and slender. And they believe that the paisley is formed when the cypress tree blows in the wind and the tip of the tree slightly gently bends, and that causes the paisley motif to be formed. So each country has a different interpretation of the same motif. And here you can see the two different paisleys. The Chinese one on top, which is much more square and has a thick base with the 5 petals at the bottom, and the Indian paisley with the 3 petals on the bottom, but much more like a mango or an ambi. This is another one which has both like uh, Indian paisleys, much more round, curved, with a peacock inside. This is a sari which has booties on top and a trellis pattern to cover the background with paisleys with baskets, floral baskets in it. This is the same similar design with floral baskets. And as you can see, the border itself is of paisley, which looks extremely Indian, more Indian than other designs. And very often the same kind of motif is translated in weaving and is seen also in tanchoi fabrics. This is a extremely rare piece where we see a peacock which is perched on the divine fungus, and it forms like the shape of a paisley, and the border is with peacocks again. So here you can see in detail the left, the peacock on the paisley with the Chinese coins, and on the right you have a crane with a twisted neck and birds forming the paisley. So paisleys you can see in many saris, but very often you see them only in the pallu. We've not seen many all over paisleys. I have seen one or two, but largely it is the pallu, because I think the form kind of well in the pallu, sat well in the pallu. And here you can see a jabla, which has 2 paisley corners and the Karolia design in the border. This is another very cute jabla, which has the same treatment as from the previous sari. So like I said before, designs were similar and they were like slightly made for the community. So they were repeated and not every design was unique or something like that. Another motif is the rooster, which is very auspicious in Parsis. And in the Bunda Hishan text, the rooster is thought to be sacred. And the story or the legend is that the rooster crows in the morning, and Ariman's chains, Ariman who's locked below the mountain, his chains, and he sucks on his chains through the night, and he might get free in the morning. But when the rooster crows, his chains grow back and he cannot escape. And so the Parsis don't believe in eating a rooster, and it is auspicious. And we find it very often in chalk designs and in jablas for young children. So here you can see a border on top with margas, and below is a marga margi border where you can see a rooster and a hen, and you can see little chicks. So it's a whole family which is being depicted on the border. So this was another popular design called Marga Margi, another jabla in which you see the margas as used as a motif or a placement. So when, like I had mentioned earlier, Parsi textiles had a lot of European influence because of the British being in India. So we see a lot of designs which have bows and baskets, very, very typically European in kind of form. And this is one of the examples of bows and baskets. And if you see the border also, it has these beautiful baskets and daisies in it and chrysanthemums coming out. Again, here you see a traditional fan, but with a traditional Chinese basket. So baskets were common, but sometimes were represented in a very European way and sometimes represented in a traditional Chinese way. This is again a beautiful sari. If you see the background of the fabric, it has a pattern of a man in a boat and gates and a tree, and the design on it is extremely European with flowers, bunches of flowers and ribbons all across. So here another gara with bows and baskets. This is a very cute sari which has most likely been done in India later, much later, and maybe done by some young girl or something. And as you can see, the form is not perfect, but you know it's done from the heart. This is another border with baskets and butterflies. So these garas were done embroidered largely on beautiful fabrics made in China. We kind of have some research which shows that fabric was made in India also later. And if you see on the left hand side bottom, the purple fabric with lines in it, very fine lines, it is the Sali Gaj fabric, or which was extensively used. This fabric is a lino weave, and what happens is that after you put in like 5 threads of the weft or 10 threads, you kind of leave a small gap. And then you twist the warp threads and then again weave 5 or 10 threads of the weft and then twist the warp threads. So these lino machines existed in China, and they did this lino weaving extensively, and they created patterns also, and jacquard patterns onto the fabric. So you can see the ones above and then the light blue one at the side, where it's a very beautiful pattern in stripes with flowers in between. Here on the right again, you can see how they had put the china chini into the textiles, and on the left you can see a pink which has an overall jacquard effect. So these beautiful Gajit silks came from China, and some in India also, and we kind of have lost these fabrics in some way, and there are very few or hardly any mills who are now still doing lino fabric. Lino weaving happens in India, but it happens for a very, very like where you do, it's like a net rather than a soft silk fabric. So that is not, cannot be used for embroidery, but we see these textiles from, and hopefully we'll be able to work and recreate some of these textiles. So here, as I mentioned earlier, most of the textiles were labeled, most of them had signage, most of them had kind of something written by who it was made, which workshop it was made in. So there were seals on all the textiles. So if you see in this border, it says from Canton, and it says the company on top, Khaki company. And on the right hand side is the Karolia one, which basically when translated says the spin wheel motif on. And here you see in a sari like different seals, and on the seal on the left it says made in China, Chungtai, and below in Gujarati it says Chinni Banawat and Chungtai. So it also says how many inches was the fabric. So this fabric was 27 to 28 inches, and which were the traditional old fabrics, which were what we call the door part sari, which was basically you took 3 saris and you cut up 1 sari in half and then joined it onto one of the saris, and that way you got the full width of 45 inches. So some of the jacquards were always done in smaller, narrower widths of 28, 27 inches. Then you have a seal which says about the dyeing and where it was made. And then if you see in Gujarati, it says guarantee. Sara, I can't read the word, and guarantee. So they kind of also knew who their customer was in India, and they kind of created these textiles, and they had lots of seals. Most of the textiles had seals, and this was again something beautiful to discover when we were seeing textiles at people's homes, and I would always go and look at the corner or see at the back and find these seals, and people who had been wearing these textiles or had them for the last 50, 60 years had never even noticed them. So it's important to see your textiles. So today many of you who have garas or whatever can go and check what the seal is on your saris. So as you can see, this is a fully embroidered gara, which has been folded in a fan shape to show you that the embroidery was largely done on top till 2.5 meters, where it kind of formed the matha patti, and then the embroidery was done at the bottom all throughout, where it formed the main part of the sari. On the left hand side, you can see a gap on top, which was the part of the fabric which was used to tuck in. So it didn't make sense to make it bulky and to embroider on the fabric. And on the right hand side, you see a corner which is missing. And that was because the ladies wore it over their shoulder and tucked it at the back. They did not want excessive fabric at the back. So this corner was often left, and that kind of showed also, this is one sign that the gara was authentic, and it kind of dates it now to at least say 50, 80 to 100 years minimum if you have that corner missing. And many people now come to us and say that we don't wear it the Parsi way, or we want to wear it also in the other way. So can you kind of fill it up, or can you cover it? And I think then you can wear it both ways. So the Parsi women were kind of clever, and it was also economic not to waste the embroidery. So here you can see in other examples where the corner has always been left out. And once I got a call, and there was a celebrity who was wearing Parsi Gara sari on the ramp. It was her mother's traditional sari. And the stylist called me up and said, her gara has a problem. Can you help me? And I said, what is the problem? And he said, one corner has no embroidery. It's missing. So can we do something about it? I said, that just shows that it is an authentic gara and you can't do anything about it. So many people wonder why this corner is left and why it's not been embroidered. So here again, you can see in a Paisley Gara where the corner is missing. So it just kind of tells you that these were actually traditionally thought up through, and they did it because it helped them drape the sari. The garas were extensively brought from China, and they were heavy, and it was worn generally on auspicious occasions, and they were also expensive. It wasn't that garas were cheap and everybody could afford it. Garas were available, but it was very often the affluent families who could afford it, and the other families used to wear on a daily basis a core sari or a border. So here you can see in some of these paintings where the women have attached a core sari, a core to their sari, and on the left hand side is a portrait in which the Parsi lady, and they often wore the sari the Parsi style, very long, and covered their head, and below the head they wore a mathubano or a white scarf, And as you can see in these portraits also, both the ladies are wearing a mathubanu, and they have covered their hair with the sari. And there is a legend, or people we know, it's not, it's true that because only one, when you wear this style, the sari, only one earring showed. So very often they made only one earring, or it kind of got broken up. Okay, one sister kept one earring, one sister kept. So many people have inherited just a earring or something. Now people convert it into a pendant or something. But yeah, as you can see, your other earring did not show, so you could do with only one earring. This is a portrait of Temina Lilaowala, my grand aunt. And as you can see, she's posing in a studio with a core sari and a very simple jabla blouse with a strand of pearls and one brooch. They're extremely elegant and influenced somewhere from the British for the shoes, etc. But again, she's wearing the sari in a typical Parsi way. Here again, you can see these young girls wearing a core sari, and the pallu was kept very long. Like the difference between the Gujarati saris and the Parsi saris was that the pallu was long, and on the right hand side, and both the pictures, you can see the sadra peeking out from one side. And they wore long blouses, which were like badant, and it was, the sari was draped, and when you came home, you kind of removed the sari and you had the badan on top, and you had your ijar below. We'll see the ijars later. These are some of the cores I'm going to show you. So these are very floral cores. Very often people call them as Swiss cores or Swiss cores. And earlier I just could not understand what the word was, but through different research, it's basically Swiss cores. And basically they associated Switzerland with flowers and beautiful roses and blooms. So they were called Swiss cores or Swiss embroidery. So these are typical borders with roses and flowers. So here again, you can see a multicolor sari with roses. And this border here, you can see with grapes, bunches of grapes also thrown in to the border. And we've seen many jablas and borders which have the grape motif. And recently I saw a gara which had all over just big bunches of grapes. Quite ugly again, but fun to see. Another motif like which we've seen earlier is the rooster, and this is a very famous marga border with fine peaking knots. This is a chini border, and here you can see the two cute puppies sitting next to the women. In the lower border, you can see them clearly, and this is the chini border, which has like a carriage which is being pulled by a donkey. You can see the couple sitting in the carriage. And again, this is in fine peaking knots. This is also bird border. Then borders were quite popular and worn extensively, not only by the Parsi community, but by other women in many other communities, and it got quite popular across North India in the court of the Nizams of Hyderabad. So here you see a woven border, and very often these borders came from Germany, and there are catalogs in which we've seen these borders being extensively documented, and these were woven, and then this was also done in Banaras. So if you see, it has the pagodas and the bridges and the cherry blossoms, but it is woven. This is not embroidered, and it is woven in a very simple style where behind, if you turn it behind, sorry, I don't have that picture, but you can see bands of colors. So there's a common color running through the weft, and the extra weft is like a band of green, then a band of orange, then a band of blue, like that. So so it looks very colorful, but it is quite simple to weave. These are another Khaka core. So here you can see how beautifully it was represented. The birds are very stylized, very, very accurate, and also the coloring is gorgeous. Here, again, you can see a bunch of grapes, butterflies, birds, etc. So codes were very popular, and what many women did, they applied the core, wore the sari, removed the core, washed the sari, and then reapplied it on another color. They could reapply on another color, on another fabric. So depending on what you wanted to wear, you could move the core. So the core was very flexible, and even today we have people who kind of change the borders. And many Parsi women have collected several borders in the closets, and they show me, I'll give it to so and so, this I'll keep it for my daughter-in-law, this I'll give it to somebody else. So people collect a lot of borders and then wear it in different time periods. This is a rare blue and white core with French knots, so peaking knots and satin stitch. So very different color combination, most likely inspired by Chinese pottery. This is another fantastic, in which you can see the deer with the divine fungus and characters from Chinese language. And it has the bat and it has butterflies. So here we've shot some of our borders. We have many borders, and we've been collecting across years. And it is an inspiration for us to see different colorways, designs, etc. And this is a picture I found recently, and it is a group of Parsi women, of the first group of Parsi women and Maharashtrian women who worked at Central Bank. And they were the first employees, Parsi employees of Central Bank. And as you can see in the front row and at the back also, women wearing their core saris. So the distinctive feature was that they kept the pallu very low, long, and they took a sword or put the sari over their head. The other item which was exported with garas, etc., were jablas or small tunics, which were very often used for babies. On the left is a famous portrait by Pestanji, and on the right is a young child posing in a studio in a jabla. Often you don't see children in a studio posing alone, because it was very difficult to photograph, because you had to be extremely still, you couldn't smile, you couldn't move, otherwise there was a slight blur. So as you can see, the child must have moved his hand a little, so there's a blur on one side. But you see these photographs of children in jablas. And on the left hand side here is my maternal grandfather, who's wearing his jabla. And this photograph was taken in 1928, when he was, I think, 1 year old. And on the right hand side is me in a jabla with my two sisters. So we are all posing in a jabla. So even now, Parsi families photograph their kids in jablas, and now it's become quite trendy to wear jablas and all for navjots, and when the child is having its initiation ceremony. So I'm going to show you some jablas again here. So this is a beautiful jabla with a peacock border. As you can see here, again, with birds, and this is an all-over jabla. So the jablas were basically a single fabric. This is the width of the fabric itself, around 28 inches, and they just created a neck. In this piece, you can see the neck hasn't been cut out or stitched. And the neck was very small, so only a baby's head could fit in through it. And it's a rectangular piece of fabric, and you had to just stitch the sides, and you could wear it over your head. So it was extremely simple, and there was no detailed pattern making or anything to it. Here, as you can see, very small neck, and just room for the arms to come out, and it's stitched at the sides. This is again an elaborate jabla with a trellis design, and you can see the neckline and the sleeves. And here is one more jabla. This you can see as a picture of the kids in the jablas. And these are some of our e-jars which we have used. I'll just quickly run through this. And now we are going to I'm going to show you some of our work which we have been doing, interpreting Parsi Gara and taking it forward into a modern context. So we started in 2012, and we have a group of karigars who do the work, and we use different techniques and to do hand embroidery. And here you can see workers working on an adda or a frame. So many workers work at the same time. At the back is the khaka or the stencil, and on top it is embroidered. So they follow the drawing. So it's extremely important to do the drawing well. And then once the piece comes off, it's ironed, it's stitched, it's cut and made into garments or into sarees. So a lot of finishing. This was one of our first designs, the crane sari. I wanted to do something with Gara, but I did not want it to be traditional. And so we decided to use just as a edge on one side and flying cranes on top. And this was our first collection where we worked with different techniques, different ideas. And this was one of our saris, which was then featured in the movie Sanju, worn by Sonam Kapoor. And here you can see another set of ideas which we took forward. This is our crane sari, which is our all-time favorite, and we've done very well. We do it in various colors also, and it's the most popular sari we have. We also work with textiles and garments. So this collection was inspired by blue and white pottery. So we have made a lenga with it. So this whole collection was inspired by trade. So as you can see, it's lots of blue and white cherry blossoms. And then this was something which we had done on different fabrics like georgettes, nets, etc. Then these are the more traditional, elaborate Gara embroidery. And I was inspired by the Canton shawls or the big piano shawls. And we kind of incorporated that into the pallu. So this has become one of our signature elements. And this is a China Chini sari, which is heavy embroidery. And on the left, you see the white sari, which is inspired by sadras worn by Parsi women. So we've kind of incorporated various aspects of Parsi culture into our saris. We do ombre shading, use jacquard fabrics, and these are with lots of birds and foliage. We try to break away from the traditional placements. One of the collections we did last year was a Japan collection, in which we used, instead of using extremely Chinese motifs, we used largely Japanese motifs. So here you can see the different designs. And this is the latest collection, again, where we've been inspired by traditional pieces, but kind of given it a contemporary twist and used different fabrics like organza, net, satins, georgettes, etc. And we do also lengas, which have become now very popular for brides. And as you can see here, we do it with embroidery, little less, mix it up with brocades also, tanchois. And this was a show which we did just before Corona hit us in Lakme Fashion Week. And you can see on the left is a kimono, there's a lenga, and there's a skirt paired with an obi belt. So these are the different silhouettes which we did. So we did a kaftan, which was influenced by a jabla, like a long jabla jacket. We used different borders. And the name of the collection was Memories on Cloth. So it was my idea of seeing textiles while I grew up and kind of using all of that in the collection. This was, we were invited by the global Kipao exhibition, which was held in the China Silk Museum. And we sent a sari, and it was like a Kipao, but with a pallu, and it has like 3D embroidery in it. And some of this, we have been fortunate that celebrities have won. So here you can see a picture of Oprah Winfrey posing for Elle magazine wearing a China Chini sari. And the funny thing is, a lot of my Parsi aunties called me up and said that it's all very nice, but why is she not wearing it nicely? And Majanu Baraba Akhu Pallu dekhate, so it would have been better. So I love how all my Parsi, I call them my Parsi aunties, but they have comments for everything. So it makes it fun. And this is Asha Parekh wearing a bamboo gara, and this is Wahida Rahman wearing a border sari. And this was a very beautiful piece we did, which was commissioned by Bamani Rani for Amitabh Bachchan, which had in the border his name and Parsi embroidery in between. So we've been doing different things, and we've been interpreting it for our own kind of language, to create our own language. We don't want to slavishly copy traditional textiles. And I think embroidery was always evolving, Parsi embroidery was always evolving, and we hope that we've played a small role in to keep this craft alive and to take it forward. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Ashdeen. It was really great hearing about the fungus and the dragon and the rooster. Really stunning. Been trying to collate the questions, and so I could put together questions for you in some kind of logical form.
Okay.
Let's begin with asking you. I'm sure you can, but how can a layperson distinguish between a gara which was made in China and one which was made in India?
So
if those made in China still do exist.
Yeah, many of them exist, and the easy way is to very often see the fabric which it is embroidered on, and once you know the fabric, you can easily tell. You can look for the seals also, like I mentioned in it, and that is one sign of where it was made and how it was made. But also the embroidery, the quality of embroidery is giveaway. Very often, very fine, very detailed work was the earlier work which was done in China, and then it became a lot more simplified in India. So I think that is the kind of difference you can kind of make out.
Do we know when exactly these garas started to be made in India? Around what decade?
So we have many anecdotes of ferias coming to India with their wares, traveling and bringing saris and potlis, sitting at the courtyard and teaching Parsi families how to do the embroidery. So they would sell through the day. In the afternoon, they would rest at the hotel and kind of teach the families and share the knowledge. So we don't know an exact date when it started, but we think definitely somewhere around the late 19th century.
Okay. And related to the previous question, somebody wanted to know, uh, would a good thumb rule be that anything made 50 years, if somebody tells you that a sari is 50 years or more old, was it likely to have been from China?
Now I think that 50-year thing has extended to 80 years or whatever. So I think if it is 80, 100 years old, then it is definitely Chinese.
Adil wants to know if it's true that prior to them being worn as garas, incidentally, you need to tell us about the origin of the words gara and kor, because that is another question.
Yeah.
That prior to being worn as saris, they were, they started life as embroidered tablecloths in China.
Yes, and a lot of textiles were made in China for the European market, like I said, and they were used for their piano shawls, they were used as covers, they were used in upholstery, they were used in a lot of places, in garments also. So definitely, yeah, it did start in various different sources, but then it kind of went on to the saris. And as for Gara, like I said, we've done all this research, but I still don't know the definite meaning or where the word came from. And the most closest explanation is that the fabric, which was so soft, it could sieve through, like, so it was apre gari sake or garo, like, so that kind of is one of the explanations, but we don't know if it is that. So
And would it be correct to say core is like the literal translation of border?
yes, core is a literal translation.
Okay, there were two different questions. One person wanted to know how to preserve garas, and the other one wants to know how to clean garas. Probably she had a coffee stain, or probably Sarsni Machino stain, I don't know.
So this is one common thing we get, and the idea to keep the garas clean is you have to wear it very carefully, because some of the older garas do not have pakka color, as we call it. So the color is not fixed. So it will, if you wash it in water, it will run. So they have to be delicately only dry cleaned. And now you have a lot of fancy dry cleaners who can extremely delicately dry clean them. And if you even give it to a dry cleaner, put it in a pillowcase, a cotton pillowcase, white pillowcase, so that the color doesn't run or something, and ask them to dry clean in the pillowcase, so that it does not touch other textiles and it does not get torn or it doesn't get damaged. And the other thing you need, if you have garas, you should air them time to time, bring them out, change the fold of the sari. And very often I tell people, if you can roll it on a curtain rod or something completely and cover it with malmal, then keep it, it's the best, so that there are no creases and there's no tension on the fabric, on the folds. So that's one thing. And like I've always said, air it and wear it. So that's the best way to keep a gara carefully. So air it and wear it.
Would you say that there are some garas with typically Indian motifs, maybe not a Chinese temple, but a temple or a swastik, and would you interpret them as Indian motifs?
Like the Indian motifs which we've seen are the peacock, and we've seen, but we've not seen like a Indian scene, like this is one thing we are making,
Yes.
which we have decided to make, is the Bawa Bavi. So change that into a Bawa Bavi and have like a colony gate, and have like a small, like a Parsi Dukkar Fiat or something like that. Typical things which are very Parsi. And so we've already started work. So it's a Bawa Bavi sari.
Is this all going to be the rage in the next wedding season?
Hopefully.
Okay, so somebody wanted to know what are the threads used, and somebody else wanted to know what are the typical fabrics used. So if you could take both together.
Yeah. So earlier the thread used was silk yarn, which was, so you have like silk yarns which are twisted, which is an S twist and a Z twist. So it kind of then gives a sheen to your embroidery and how you use it. So it's basically yarn which is taken like 2 strands or 3 strands, and then it is spun. So it gives it a nice twist, and the twisted thread is used. So often it was the silk yarn which was hand twisted. So that was used in the embroidery, and it was all hand dyed. So they could do various variations of colors, various variations of the thickness. So you could use different threads for different designs. And nowadays we get mill-made silk yarn, which is high density twisted. So it doesn't break easily, or it doesn't have like small edges coming out or something. So it's much more smoother, finer. And as far as fabric, like I said, there was Saligaj fabric, and there was the extensive jacquards which came from China. And the colors which were most popular were reds, purples, burgundies, kumkum color, black. We've seen blues, but we've seen very few garas on lighter shades. So basically the gara kind of aesthetic comes out when you have tonal embroideries on a darker background. It kind of then tends to stand out and look like a typical kind of the aesthetic of a gara.
The paler ones are the ones which you are trying to popularize with your paints and your
Yeah, we've been
views.
doing, and the paler ones were there, but they were more rarer.
Okay. So we have a ceramic artist in our midst, and he's demanding to know why we don't see pottery in your embroidery.
We do. We've done a whole collection which was inspired by ceramic plates and ceramic pots. And Mr. Writer, we will do more also.
And Mr. Writer also wants to know who's the we that you keep talking about.
When I say we, I always mean my team, because I don't do anything alone. I don't sit and draw the designs alone or whatever. So when I refer we, is always my team, and I couldn't do it without them. So.
Bats normally interpreted as inauspicious.
Yes.
Would you say another reason for dragons not being so popular is that dragons would also have been considered somewhat inauspicious?
So the Western culture very often looks at the dragon as an inauspicious kind of motif, but in China, it's a very benign character which is extremely auspicious and only very often seen in the emperor's kind of garments or the princes and things like that. So definitely, but again, like I said, very rare to find a dragon, and we've seen in few shawls and we've seen that one border. So we don't see it often in Parsi. I've not seen garas which have like a full dragon moving or something like that, which you see a lot in pottery.
Another question is whether this Gara embroidery is similar to the Maharashtrian embroidery called the Pilav, which
I have not heard of it, and I will have to do research on this.
Right. So you mentioned that you carried coals to Newcastle in the sense that your sari, the King Pao sari, is now in the Chinese Art Silk Museum. What were the other influences that the traders brought back besides the saris, and what went back to China in return?
So I don't think we exported any handicrafts from India to China, but what came back were lots of silks, lots of ceramics. People also snuff bottles, if you've seen, and there is a beautiful collection of the Tata family in the museum in Bombay, and so snuff bottles. You had pipes, you had chests, wooden chests, which were used to store garas and other precious items. So you had lots of that which came from China. But a lot of cotton also went from India to fine cotton. It was exported from India to China.
Okay, a question about the you showed on a few of the fabrics. The question was those saris which you showed with the Canton stamps on them. How old would those be?
Those would be around easily around 100 years old or more. 100 and
okay.
So that is definitely a sign that it is 100 and more.
There was a question which says, "What did Parsi women wear before garas?" I wanted to say non-garas, but I think you're the expert.
So we've seen pictures in like there's a famous litho also, which you can see of a Parsi family where the woman is wearing a long like a kaftan, like a jabha, and with these very wide pants below, like a ijars, and that may be also. And if you see the Zoroastrian textiles in Iran, which have continued even today, they wear a jacket or a kurta which is called the sikoter, which is made with different panels. So so I think that was, and they wrapped it with like a big shawl which was like a sari. So we've seen various images of saris also worn by Parsi women, but much more in a Gujarati style where the pallu was short and it was still taken over the head.
Okay. You referred briefly in passing to Persian motifs. There was a request if you could elaborate a little more about the influences, West, East China, North India.
The Persian motifs became extremely popular in China during the Tang dynasty, because a Persian princess married into the Chinese family, and she carried with her a lot of her people, and that's where there was this exchange of ideas and motifs which travel from Persia to China. And you can see in various Persian textiles. We have done much more elaborate study on this, where we see Sogdian textiles with a circlet of pearls, with motifs which are very identical to what we then see in China during the Tang dynasty, and then later used in Chinese textiles, and then somewhere translated into embroideries which the Parsis consume. So definitely there has been exchange of ideas and motifs across continents.
Okay. Another question was most of the fabrics which you've shown, are they in a museum or they belong to individuals, families, what?
So, a lot of the slides as textiles which I have collected over the years, many of the slides are the research I did with Parzor Foundation. So they are from Parzor's archives. So those are the two resources of textiles here shown. So many belong to, many of these textiles belong to women across India, and some of the textiles have also been photographed in Hong Kong, where the families were from Shamin and Canton. So it's that.
You want to say a little bit about the border of the of Mr. Bachchan?
Yes.
Has an interesting story.
So the border has his name written in various languages. So we translate, Baman had commissioned a calligrapher in Bombay to write his name in, I think, 20 or 24 different languages, Indian and foreign. And it is that same word, Amitabh, which goes embroidered throughout the border in different languages. So he had done extremely detailed calligraphy, and we had to then embroider that very carefully. And also for us, when we do a flower or something, we know what the flower looks like. And I often tell my karigars, tumne pakshi ko dekha hai, so you know how the beak is, how the wings fly. But writing different languages, we had to just blindly follow the artwork. So it was quite fun to do it. And after we put this up, we've got 2-3 commissions where there was one lady who said, I also want a shawl with my name written in different languages. So we've done that. And somebody was celebrating his 75th birthday. So we've done for them also. So it's something which was fun.
So you showed us shawls, you showed us shararas, you showed us kimonos. Lengas. Do you also do little jackets or kotis?
We do jackets, and we kind of do elaborate jackets, more large, and we do largely for women, so it makes it simpler. Women spend more than men.
There's a question from the American diaspora. A gara is seen as an elegant garment for a special occasion. Are you concerned that with this popularity of your work, it will lose its elite status and become an item of everyday wear?
No. Trust me, it's not so cheap that people will wear it.
Yeah.
We find clients who would like to wear it every day. I'd be very happy. So please send them over, and we'd be more than happy. But I think the embroidery is expensive, and the craftsmanship is what it is, like hand embroidery, and we cannot produce also. It's not something which can be produced so abundantly like it would become popular like a Zara or something, but it kind of takes time, and it can be, so I think it will never be a craft which is watered down or something.
Mm-hmm. So, which reminds me of an anecdote. There were two what some writers call NCPA Parsis talking, Parsi women, and they were comparing sarees. And one of them looked at the gara which the other one was wearing, and she said, "Oh no, I wouldn't even wear that to a paidas. Paidas, for the benefit of our non-Parsi viewers, is a funeral." So there are these shades of
Yes.
class within the Gara too.
So today there are lots of people who are doing machine embroidered garas and much more cruder versions or whatever. But I think there's space for everybody, and we live in a huge country where there are a billion people, and there are Indians all around the world who want to consume embroidery and Parsi Gara. So I think there's room for everybody, and some people don't have a budget, and I'm not one of those from that elite school that which says, okay, if you can't do hand embroidery, you shouldn't do it, because it, in a sense, even if you're wearing a machine embroidered or something, you are appreciating the craft at the end of the day, and you kind of have some kind of reverence for it. So it's kind of good, and it's like whichever pocket suits you, it's for that.
Great. Somebody wanted you to end with a Rooster story. You mentioned about the popularity of the Rooster, and they wanted to hear the story from your mouth, I'm sure, about Zuhak and the chains and the gnawing of the chains.
So I think I said it where I think.
Yeah, they wanted it reiterated because the lady didn't catch it fully, she said.
Okay, so the story of the rooster is basically the Ariman or the Duak, right? Is buried under Damavan, and he's chained, and when he sucks on the chains through the day, and he would break free, and every morning when the rooster crows again, the chains become thicker, and he kind of is locked up again. So basically the rooster uh, protects us from the evil, and does not let evil take over.
Great. Before that, thank you very, very much, Ashdeen. It was great hearing from you, especially about the little known aspects. The fungus was a great revelation for me. And knowing about the bats too. So thank you for that. Thank you everybody for attending.